What is good, Josh on this full game man, back with yet another reaction video, baby. And today we're back with another NC Hammer ranked and explained video. You guys actually requested this one. That means that y'all starting to show some love to the anime videos. I love it. Keep dropping more down below. If I haven't already checked it out, just search on the channel other ranked and explains. Maybe I'll even make a playlist for them, my reactions to these, if you guys are really enjoying them, so you guys can know which ones I've already done and ask for different ones. But of course, down below in the comment section, let me know what other ones you want me to watch. I do have 2 other videos from him that I will react to here soon. And if y'all are showing the love and support to it, we might start drawing these out from Anime Tuesdays and just start dropping them pretty regularly just as they come up. So let me know if you guys want to see more of these more frequently throughout the week, and we'll definitely drop a couple more. Now today we already did Fire Force's strongest captains last time. You guys wanted to see Fire Force's just strongest characters explained now. So we're moving away from captains, so I'm sure we'll probably see some of the captains in the video again, but just strongest characters in general now is what we're going to check out today. So if you guys are ready for it, leave a like and subscribe and turn that bell on for your boys so you guys know when videos are going live. Without further ado, let's jump into the seat.
Fire Force has returned with its 3rd season, 5 years after its 2nd season's conclusion. And while I just recorded an entire hour-long recap video on everything that happens in Season 1 and Season 2, just recapping the events of what happens in Fire Force maybe isn't enough for a lot of you who are still scratching your heads trying to figure out what all these crazy terms they keep using are. Which is why it's...
And I will say I haven't seen Fire Force at all, so I'll be able to watch all 3 seasons back to back to back. So I don't even need to watch the recap. That's the one thing I love about having to catch up on anime. I get to just watch the seasons back to back.
Today I want to talk about one of the most important terms you're going to be hearing in Fire Force as you watch Season 3, pillars. See, the idea of pillars has existed since pretty much the very beginning of Fire Force. However, as Fire Force's story has progressed, the idea of what a pillar is and what their role in society is has massively changed. See, well, some will tell you that pillars in Fire Force are just those who are blessed with an Adola burst. Others will tell you that pillars were specifically created by the Evangelist to bring about the end of the world. And funnily enough, neither of those explanations are wrong. And thus today, I want to sit down and explain to you exactly what the pillars in Fire Force are, their roles, what they represent, and behind a spoiler warning, who all of them are. And hopefully by the end of today's video, you'll have such a complete understanding of who the pillars are that enjoying Season 3 will be even more of a breeze than you originally thought it would be. So with no further ado, let's get directly into the 8 pillars in Fire Force explained. But before we get to explaining anything, guys, please, for me, like this video, subscribe to the page, and hit that noti bell. So, the pillars. What are they? Who are they? What do they represent? And what's their role in the story? Well, let's start this video off in the way that we tend to start these kinds of videos off and answer the easy questions. What are the pillars? Simply put, the pillars are individuals who possess an Adola burst, aka individuals who possess a pyrokinetic ability that ties its roots back to Adola, which is basically fire.
I know I'm messing things up. We're gonna go back so we can get this explanation. I can't help but, like, I've watched so many of these videos but not recognized it, but the beat that's playing in the background is actually kind of smooth. If somebody knows what that beat is, can I get it? Can I use it for my videos too? Because that thing kind of smooth.
Adola burst, aka individuals who possess a pyrokinetic ability that ties its roots back to Adola, which is basically Fire Force's version of hell. Now, these Adola bursts are referred to as many things in the Fire Force universe. More often than not, they're referred to as pure and unsullied flames, implying that these Adola bursts that these individuals have access to are more powerful than other pyrokinetic abilities, on account of being pure and unsullied. And this is backed up pretty exponentially by basically every single Adola burst we see in Fire Force. But see, there's a small problem, because if you stop the explanation of what is a pillar at, oh, somebody with an Adola burst, well, then you're not being 100% accurate. See, well, yes, every single pillar does have an Adola burst. Not every person who has an Adola burst is a pillar. One of the close followers of the Evangelist, Fairy, possesses an Adola burst, but is not considered one of the 8 pillars in the Fire Force universe. And therefore, it's kind of like a all squares are rectangles, but not all rectangles are squares situation. To be a pillar, yes, you need an Adola burst, but just having an Adola burst does not make you a pillar. Now, the reason that a pillar needs an Adola burst in order to be a pillar is because an Adola burst allows for the pillar to connect to the Adola and other Adola burst users via an Adola link. And that's important. See, the 8 pillars being called the 8 pillars in Fire Force could be for a lot of reasons, as basically every single culture in human history has had an 8 pillars of its own. There's the 8 pillars of health, the 8 pillars of joy, according to the Dalai Lama, the 8 pillars of Greek wisdom, the 8 pillars of positive peace, and so on and so forth. But like with many ideas that seem to permeate across all human culture, the 8 pillars idea actually originated in China. See, the 8 pillars of the sky is a concept from Chinese mythology, and this idea, which comes from Chinese mythology essentially stated that in China there were 8 mountains, located at the 8 cardinal directions: north, south, east, west, northwest, southwest, northeast, southeast. And these 8 mountains, or 8 pillars, supposedly held up the sky. Now, these 8 mountains in China include mountains like Kunlun, Jade Mountain, Mount Buzo, and have been talked about as instrumental in keeping the sky in China since at least the 1st century. And thus the 8 pillars in Fire Force are supposed to serve the same purpose. That is to say that they hold up the sky. However, their connection to Adola and their connection to each other is a built-in weakness of sorts. See, because while yes, the Adola burst granted to every single one of the pillars does give them insane powers, like the ability to go so fast they can break their body down into molecules in reverse time to reform their body, cooling the entire universe to stop its expansion and therefore time, predicting where fires will break out, and so on and so forth. A connection to the Adola is technically connection to hell and the Evangelist. And while only those who are given an Adola grace from the Evangelist are able to use their Adola burst without an Adola link to somebody else with an Adola grace, even this Adola link is also built into the pillars for a not so advantageous reason to the pillars. See, because, well, one way to talk about the pillars is as entities that hold up the sky. What would hypothetically happen if one or if all 8 of those pillars were to disappear? Well, then the sky would no longer have pillars holding it up and the sky would fall. And that is exactly what happened in the Great Cataclysm 250 years ago. See, the Great Cataclysm of 250 years ago, of which I have an entire video on if you want to watch it, was meant to burn the entire world to ashes. However, because at that time there wasn't enough pillars and their strength wasn't great enough, the Great Cataclysm was actually unsuccessful in its torching of the entire planet. And thus, for the last 200 or so years, the Evangelist has been trying to create 8 new powerful pillars that will be able to enact the second cataclysm. But how? See, great cataclysms don't just occur. And we learned this kind of from the Chinese Peninsula arc. See, when the combined forces of Company 4, 2, and 8 all sent people to the Chinese Peninsula to try and understand what was going on with the Adola bursts, they came across what appeared to be an older, more broken down Amaterasu. And after interacting with this Amaterasu and the Lady in Black inside of it, all of those involved in the Chinese Peninsula investigation realized that the Amaterasu was not a perpetual energy machine, but rather a machine that was able to harness the power of an Adola burst. But Amaterasu goes one step further than that. See, as we saw Tempe, the demon infernal, who was turned demon infernal by the Evangelist 250 years ago when she emerged from the spatial rift, trying to use this rundown Amaterasu to destroy the entire oasis that was grown around it because of its energy. It's implied through the 8 arrow keys that we see and the 8 pillars that revolve around the inside of this old rundown Amaterasu that there should be 8 sacrifices in this machine. This is displayed to us by the key arrow that's fired into a keyhole above the door, where it was explained to us that these arrows were a representation of arrows that in feudal Japan were shot into houses, and when these arrows were shot into a house, the people living inside of it would be selected as sacrifices. And therefore, these 8 arrows inside of this old rundown Amaterasu are supposed to represent the 8 pillars that would be sacrificed to this machine to enact a second cataclysm. And now, well, this is never confirmed. It's my personal theory that the Great Cataclysm that was unable to turn the world into a second sun was actually started from that older rundown Amaterasu that the Lady in Black lives in. As it stated during the Chinese Peninsula arc, that smaller Amaterasu seems to have existed pre-Great Cataclysm. Anyways, the Evangelist has learned from her mistakes, and thus the Evangelist, with the help of the 7th pillar, who we'll talk about in a little bit behind the medium of a spoiler warning, has been spending the last 200 years to A, try to create 8 pillars, and B, create pillars of a level of strength that when those pillars are combined with the Evangelist, a second Great Cataclysm powerful enough to turn the entire world into a second sun will occur. And this is where we get into the idea that A, Adola bursts, and B, Adola links aren't all that great for pillars. See, because the general idea between being able to connect with the Evangelist making you a pillar is only built into the idea of being a pillar because the final goal of the 8 pillars is to have them all fuse with each other and the Evangelist inside of Amaterasu, which would lead to the second Great Cataclysm. Now, for any of you who are being like, this is all spoilers, no, it's not. If you're caught up with the anime, this is all information that you know. It's not that well explained, and it is kind of hinted at very subliminally, but it should be information that you know. But with what they are and their purpose out of the way, let's get to answering the who part of the equation here and meet our 8 pillars. Starting with the first one and working our way to the 8th one, because anime-only watchers already know the first 6. However, it is important before we get into meeting all of these pillars to note that every single pillar is actually a representative of one of the key human emotions, those being madness, passivity, apathy, rage, destruction, fear, disgust, and despair. Now, by and large, these are all supposed to be considered negative emotions. Because, and we'll learn this in season 3, but me telling you right now isn't really the end of the world. Fire Force is a battle between positive emotions and negative emotions. Negative emotions stoke the flames of Adola, while positive emotions have the ability to put them out. It's about as anime gets. But as all the 8 pillars have a deep tie to Adola, they themselves are supposed to be representations of the 8 negative emotions of humankind. And thus the first pillar, Amaterasu, is the representation of madness. Of all of the pillars, we actually probably know the least about Amaterasu. She's a spectral woman who appears to live in the Adola, but also claims to have watched over the entirety of the Tokyo Empire throughout its entire creation. And as she technically exists at the center of the Tokyo Empire, she appears able to force an Adola link with really any of the pillars whenever she wants to, which is displayed when she's able to force an Adola link with Shinra when he's visiting the fort to try and ask Captain Hagu about why he possibly could have seen him in the Adola. Now, as the representation of madness, Amaterasu has a deep, seething hatred for all of humanity. However, when you consider the fact that Hajime Industries very willingly placed her inside of Amaterasu to burn essentially forever, acting as an infinite power source, though burning with her own Adola burst power, one could understand how a deep-seated hatred and a deep-seated boredom would drive her to essentially madness. Which is why when she took over Shinra when he was visiting the Fourth, she tried to use his power as one of the pillars to tear down the entirety of the Tokyo Empire. And thus the allegiances of Amaterasu are kind of unknown, though her presence as the perpetual power source of Amaterasu does absolutely serve the purposes of the White Clad. In terms of what her pyrokinetic ability is, we don't actually know. However, we do know that her Adola burst is strong enough that she's able to maintain a perpetual fire strong enough to power the entirety of the Tokyo Empire for like 200 years. So that's pretty impressive, even if it is just, I burn myself alive so hot that it creates energy that the entire empire is able to use. But enough about the perpetual power plants on Amaterasu. Let's talk about the first pillar to awaken that gets to walk around, Haumea, also known as the second pillar or the pillar of passivity. Haumea's ability is that she can create and control electricity. And while that sounds pretty basic, she uses it in a bunch of really interesting ways. See, she can use electricity in the way that every other lightning/electricity user uses it, by shocking her opponents and frying electrical systems. However, she also has the ability to control the electrical impulses inside of other people's bodies, allowing for her to control people's nervous systems, which is how she was able to make Sho stab Shinra. But it goes beyond just controlling nervous systems. She can also
She got shadow possession jutsu. So wait, does that mean shadow possession jutsu would technically be a lightning ninjutsu? Because it takes over the I'm just playing, bro. I will always draw things back to Naruto, and I'm going to say wild statements just because, but when you really think about it, though, it might be.
Control endorphin flow and neurotransmitters, meaning that she can go beyond just making your arm go like this, but actually control your behavior, making you angry, sad, psychotic. And because of her innate control of endorphins and neurotransmitters, she's also able to read people's minds. And as she's been aligned with the Evangelist since her infancy, being perpetually bombarded with all of the dark and secretive thoughts that people hide in the deepest, darkest recesses of their brain, caused her to go insane. Now, I'd like to add in the conversation around all of these pillars who their protectors are, as every single pillar has a specified protector. And Haumea's protector is Chara, the Reflector, who's kind of raised her as a father figure since she was basically a baby. Now, after Haumea is our third pillar, Sho, Shinra's little brother and the pillar of apathy. Now, Sho, like Haumea, was recruited into the faction of the Evangelist at a very young age. In fact, he was abducted by the Evangelist when he awoke to his Adola burst, which created so much energy that it infernalized his mother, who turned into a demon infernal, who went blind when she saw the Evangelist in the Adola and therefore turned her horns into her eyes by dragging them down on her head. And the Evangelist directed Sho's mother to direct Sho to the White Clad, where he would be raised until eventually he became a knight in the White Clad, partially because he was a pillar and partially because of his severed universe ability, an ability that allowed for him to cool the expansion of the universe to a stopping point, stopping time, creating a time stop that he himself was not subjected to, giving him essentially infinite movement speed. However, after Sho's battle against Shinra, when Sho was subjected to his childhood memories that made him resistant to the cause of the Evangelist, he was essentially electrically lobotomized by Haumea to make him not only complacent but also compliant with the will of the Evangelist, and to make bad worse, he was also stripped of his severed universe Adola burst by the Evangelist. Because remember, the only way that an Adola burst is used by a pillar is an Adola grace, which is only granted by the Evangelist or the Lady in Black for like 1 second. Adola links allow for people who have an Adola burst but not an Adola grace to tap into the grace of somebody else, but those are rare, obviously. Now, Sho's protector is Arrow, who's a 3rd generation pyrokinetic with the ability to make a controllable fire arrow and bow. However, because of Sho's iffy involvement in the story, Arrow's always getting sent out to protect other people, like how Maya. Now after Sho, we have his older brother, Shinra, the 4th pillar, also known as the Pillar of Rage. Now Shinra is only one of 2 pillars that is actively working against the will of the Evangelist. He, as the main character of the story and as one of the 8 pillars, is under constant bombardment from the White Clad, who are trying to bring him into their fold. However, unfortunately, because of his own strength and the strength of the Fire Force companies, Shinra is able to battle back against the will of the Evangelist and the White Clad. And he does this with his 3rd generation pyrokinetic ability. It allows for him to shoot fire out of the bottom of his feet. However, when Shinra is graced with an Adola link that allows for him to use his Adola burst, he's able to propel himself with the fire coming out of the bottom of his feet so fast that he's able to surpass the speed of light. However, because no object, I'm not going to get into the quantum mechanics of it, can surpass the speed of light, the force this applies on his body actually separates his body into subatomic particles. And wildly enough, from a quantum mechanics standpoint, this was actually a pretty accurate thing to do. As we learned recently, that really the only thing that's able to possibly travel beyond the speed of light is signals sent from previously paired electrons. Once again, I'm not going to get into it. All this is to say, the most important thing is that Shinra's able to fly.
I don't know why that's probably the coolest thing I heard all video. Science do sometimes be cool. Like, there's really nothing faster than light. That's crazy. Even sound, even light is faster than sound. That's wild. So like if I turn on, there would be no way possible I could turn on this light and ever beat it to the corner over there. Ever. Without breaking apart my molecules. That's crazy.
Faster than the speed of light. However, as the subatomic particles that are Shinra fly faster than the speed of light, they actually travel back in time. 1, allowing for Shinra to reform his body to act as though it had never broken apart in the first place, and 2, allowing for Shinra to see into the past of anybody he's kicking while experiencing this Adola link. Like when Shinra was able to force Sho to see the memories of their past, and when he was able to see into Tempei's past, seeing how Tempei was infernalized 200 years ago. Now, for a large swath of the Fire Force that is currently out, Shinra's really the only pillar we ever see awaken, as it's really not until season 2 that we see the 5th pillar, Inca, awaken. Now, Inca is the pillar of destruction, a girl whose pyrokinetic ability allowed her to see where fires were about to burst out. A pyrokinetic ability that didn't fall within the purview of either 2nd or 3rd generations, and thus Inca believed herself to be the first ever 4th generation, and she wasn't technically wrong. See, Inca doesn't necessarily morally fall on one side of the equation. Inca, as the pillar of destruction, just wants to see things burn. She wants to be in danger. She wants a life of excitement and believes she'll find that life of excitement with the White Clad. And thus she takes her pyrokinetic ability, the ability to see where flames are going to pop up and trace those pathways herself to make them pop up to the side of the Evangelist. Now, in terms of all the pyrokinetic abilities of the pillars, this one's probably the weakest. It requires for Inca to trace a bunch of invisible lines that create an explosion on somebody that most pyrokinetic can tank, though it does allow for her to avoid basically any kind of fire-related death, as any pyrokinetic ability, infernalization, or any fire of any sort she can see before it actually happens. Her protector is Ritsu, a 2nd generation pyrokinetic who's able to control the ashes of charred corpses and apply them onto an infernal, making the infernal larger and having multiple cores, like the one that was fought in the beginning of season 2. Oh, I guess I forgot to mention that Shinra also has protectors. Joker actually claims to be Shinra's protector, but in actuality, Shinra's protector as a pillar is Arthur. So Shinra's kind of got 2 protectors, Joker, who's able to turn his flames into the shape of cards that he can throw as blades, and ironically Arthur, who also uses his flames to create a plasma blade. Now, after Inca, we have the 6th pillar, and the last pillar that was introduced in the first 2 seasons of Fire Force, Nataku, the Pillar of Fear. Now, Nataku was awoken to be a pillar by Rekka Hoshimiya, who's going around the entirety of the New Tokyo Empire using infernalization bugs on children to see which one of them would be able to control the power and awake to an Adola burst, becoming the 6th pillar. And while Nataku was able to control the power of this infernalization bug, that doesn't mean that he immediately became a pillar. In fact, Nataku doesn't awaken into becoming the 6th pillar until Shinra and Nataku's protector, Korno, or Uncle Reaper, start battling it out at Hajime Industries. The intensity of their battle is what actually awakens Nataku to becoming the 6th pillar. See, because if Nataku had become a pillar at the moment that Rekka Hoshimiya had infernalized him, he actually would have been the 5th pillar, as he would have gotten his Adola burst before Inca. Now, he, as the Pillar of Fear, is incredibly frightful. And actually, it's his fear of letting down the scientists at Hajime Industries and the intensity of the battle between Shinra and Korno that leads to him awakening as a pillar. Now, prior to to getting his Adola Burst, Nataku had the ability to create and control fire claws. However, upon awakening as a pillar and gaining access to his Adola Burst, Nataku gained the ability to essentially create flaming radiation signs that shot radiating lasers. And thus, the more this technique was used, the higher the radiation in the vicinity of Nataku. Fortunately for the pyrokinetics in the world, they're somewhat immune to radiation, but this ability still has the propensity to melt the skin off those who are unpowered, especially if Nataku is able to use this ability at its highest possible level. As towards the end of Season 2, Nataku fires a laser that, if it hit the ground, would have created a crater 500 kilometers wide, making him offensively probably the strongest pillar in existence outside of, obviously, our MC. Shosho can stop time, but he can't stop time long enough to escape from a 500-kilometer blast radius. Now, after Nataku, we have our 7th pillar, and it's at this point that I should tell all of you who are anime only, the 7th and 8th pillar have not been revealed yet, and therefore they are spoilers. The 7th pillar is not that big of a spoiler. It's really not the end of the world. The 8th pillar is, though. So let's start with the 7th pillar. The 7th pillar, also known as the Pillar of Disgust, is a woman by the name of Sumire. Sumire is a longtime follower of the Evangelist, and I mean long time. Sumire was a businesswoman who existed on Earth pre-Great Cataclysm in the year 20XX. That's what they call all-time pre-Great Cataclysm. However, as a businesswoman, she eventually became disillusioned with the entirety of humankind, as she hated that humans got caught up in things like pointless fads. And thus she joined the side of the Evangelist and ushered in the Great Cataclysm. However, when the Great Cataclysm was unsuccessful in turning the world into a second sun, she, in order to help out the Evangelist in a post-Great Cataclysm world, is actually the sole entity responsible over the course of the last 200 years for creating newer and stronger pillars. Yes, she is technically immortal. The Evangelist has the ability to grant immortality with fire, so did the Lady in Black. And thus, over the course of the last 200 to 250 years since the Great Cataclysm, Sumire has been slowly but surely creating new pillars, which is how we have the 8 pillars we have now. Now, the real spoiler, as it pertains to Sumire, is the fact that she resided at the St. Raphael's Convent that both Hibana and Iris were raised at, and she was actually the one responsible for burning it down. Now, Sumire was believed to have died in this fire, but in actuality, she just faked her death, going into hiding for the next decade or so she could eventually pop out as a 7th pillar and help out the Evangelist in the completion of the Second Great Cataclysm. Sumire's pyrokinetic ability is a rather interesting one. She uses the heat generated by human shivering and amplifies that heat and turns it into kinetic energy, kind of like Chara. She can then use his kinetic energy to create incredibly powerful vibrations, powerful enough to create earthquakes. And this is actually why the Tokyo Empire has been rocked with earthquakes for the last decade or so, becoming more common as the story progresses. It's actually Sumire. Now, Sumire doesn't technically have a protector. She comes into the story really late, and she kind of operates like a one-woman army whose protector is basically like the Evangelist. So she doesn't actually have a Charon or anybody like that. Which brings us to our 8th and final pillar. And like I said, guys, this is like the real spoiler. So if you're anime only and you don't want the spoiler, this is your chance to leave. Because the 8th and final pillar, the Pillar of Despair, is Iris, as in sister. See, Iris is going to become the 8th pillar towards the middle of Season 3 of Fire Force. Basically, Shinra and Leonard Burns are going to come to blows for the 3rd time over the course of the story, and when Shinra comes out victorious over Leonard Burns, Iris awakens to becoming the 8th pillar. Now, this moment is heavily foreshadowed throughout Fire Force, especially so when Shinra comes face to face with Amaterasu, at which point he says, oh, she looks just like Iris. Now, Iris becoming the 8th pillar is a big curveball because all of the other pillars, at least so far as we know, were pyrokinetics before getting their Adola Burst, but Iris is unpowered. However, when she awakens to her Adola Burst and gets her Adola Grace, she gains the ability to cast an aura of protection around both herself and others. And this aura of protection is so incredibly powerful that it's able to block shockwaves generated by Shinra's light speed kick and block some of the strongest ignition abilities in the entirety of the Fire Force universe, making her one of the most defensively strong characters in Fire Force almost immediately, on par with the likes of people like Charon. And with that big old reveal is our 8th and final pillar. 8 of the most powerful people in the Fire Force universe, specifically created by the 7th pillar, all to be fused into the Evangelist in the center of Amaterasu to bring about the Second Great Cataclysm. And with all that,
that's crazy. So this whole thing is to basically start the end of the world. So the whole point of the show is to start the end of the world. Okay, glad I know what the point of it is before jumping into it. Like I said, I have no problem with spoilers. I love knowing how it's gonna end, so I can be watching it and be like, wow, so that's supposed to lead to this. Wow, that's supposed to lead to, and making my own connections as the story goes on. But I also don't mind to not know spoilers too and just watch it completely fresh. I mean, it's perfectly fine with me. But let me know what you guys think down below. Obviously, we didn't rank them. We just kind of talked about who the 8 pillars are and what they do. So, I mean, I don't know. It seemed like a few of them he said weren't would be able to be tanked by other ones, so they're not really strong fighters. So I don't know if they really are the strongest characters, but then he kind of backed up at least where they're strong in other fields. So I guess as an 8 group together, they'd be pretty unstoppable. Like a Akatsuki level threat and a Natsuki level threat, you know what I'm saying? Like they would be up there to basically be hard to take down for other people, for main people. And I think it was pretty good. I think it's pretty good to actually hear who they are, what they are, why they're there. It gave me a lot of background information. It's got me more hyped to see season 3. So let me know down below if you guys want to see my reviews or my opinions to each season as I finish them, or just all 3 together at the end. Let me know. I'll drop a video on it explaining what I think of Fire Force when I get to it. But do have a couple animes to get through before I get to Fire Force. But if y'all want to see that video, I'll push Fire Force to the front. So I'll catch you guys in the next video. Though, it's been your boy Sean, Black Okage, Black Avatar, King Leo, and if I had to choose, okay, question for the day then, so we have something to go on today. Which of the 8 pillars would you want to be? Give me Rage, because I want to turn into blue flames that can fly really fast. But let me know which one you guys are picking down below. Now I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm gone. Peace.